at the end of the day, and you can't change what happened. It's done. You just can't. But what you can do and what you're always in control of is your next move. So this idea that, this has happened to me and now this is my identity, this is who I am, and now I'm just stuck here. I can't buy that because I know that it's not true. I know it to be a falsehood, right? You can't control what happened, right? You, like I'm a victim of the stuff that I dealt with as a kid. I had no control over it. I was a kid. I didn't choose any of it, but it happened,
Mhm.
right? I had options though. I could have let that define me. I could have let that, hold me back and kind of keep my family's, legacy, if you will, trending in that wrong direction. Or I could have taken those things like I did and kind of used them as fuel in a fire to kind of be better.
Hey, this is a quick shout out from one of our awesome sponsors. Check this out. Thank you to Tracy down at Tranquil Turtle Massage in downtown Coeur d'Alene. Look, my wife and I, we see Tracy and her team every single month for couples massage, and it is the best thing. Tracy is a master massage specialist and a Hanu Ashiatsu trainer. You need to reach out to Tracy and her team. Make sure that you tell them that I sent you, and you'll get $25 off your next massage. Also, while you're there, check out CDA Brows, Body, and Ink. Make sure to tell Tracy that I sent you, and you'll save $100 on your next tattoo brows and plasma tightening services. Denny, you're the founder and host of Be the Standard podcast. You're a combat veteran and so much more, dude. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your service, dude. I appreciate you.
Yeah, man, absolutely. I appreciate you having me on, and I'm excited to be here. So thank you.
Come on, man. I like to kick every show off by going back a bit. Like you were born out
Sure.
in Massachusetts, I believe. Like, what was childhood like for you?
Yeah, so yeah, from Worcester, Massachusetts, which is central Mass. My childhood just it was pretty rough actually. So if you dig a little bit deeper, it's I grew up not knowing who my father is. I grew up the majority of my childhood, the first half anyways, was spent in and out of foster care. My mother, biological mother, passed away from AIDS when I was 10.
Wow.
So yeah, I mean, needless to say, childhood was rough.
Yeah.
But fortunately for me, uh, I was with a very good foster family. My foster mother and I were very close and remained close well into my 30s until she died.
Mhm.
So just such a wonderful person, a wonderful example. And so, yeah, I kind of feel lucky, right? Because
Sure.
if you think about the horror stories you hear about foster care and the statistics that show how many of those kids that come up in that environment are abused by the people that are supposed to be helping them and just further exposed to trauma. I feel very lucky, even though a lot of people will look at my story and say, Jesus, Denny, you're probably not that lucky.
Yeah.
Right. So but with that, I've always tried to pull the positives out
Mhm.
of just my life story, my experiences, and just really told myself, not only as an adult, but I remember thinking this as early on as a kid that there's always somebody out there that has it worse. There's always somebody out there who's gone through more, who's come back stronger, who's done way more with way less. And so I think that mentality and that approach is benefited me greatly just as I came into adulthood and done my best to kind of put those traumas behind me.
Man, that's gosh, what a journey you've been on, man. And I'm glad that you're in the spot that you're in today, man. And to show all the what you've gotten through. And I love that, and I came from the broken home and abuse and childhood and all that craziness as well. And I think when you go through that, it kind of toughens our mindset a little bit, and we can step into, like you
Mhm.
said, adulthood. We see the positive things out of it. And, I don't think I'd be the person today if I, that I
Yeah.
am today if without have gone through what I went through, right? It's just crazy, man.
Yeah, and I say that all the time, right? Like I'd be kind of scared to see the type of person I would be if, you know, I came up under, just all the right circumstances with the
Sure.
right parents who paid for my college, who, gave me every advantage in the world. Not that I'd be scary in the sense that, maybe I'd be this horrible person, but, I wouldn't be me,
Yep.
right? And I
Yep.
wouldn't probably be as conditioned mentally and physically and as tough as I am, had I not experienced the things that I've experienced. And again, I've benefited greatly from those traumas and done my best to try to just flip the script as much as I possibly can.
Yeah.
And that's not to say, you know you can just get away with it and not have to deal with it and process it. I mean, don't get me wrong, those things, there are certain things that have followed me into adulthood that
For sure.
have, kind of cost me dearly.
Mhm.
And, that just shows that how those childhood experiences really do trickle into adulthood and can cause issues later on. But again,
Yeah.
I've done my best to address those and continue to.
Come on.
It's a lifelong process, right?
Oh, for sure. Absolutely, man. I mean, you're a Christ follower now, but at what
Yeah.
point in your life did you take that step and give your life to Christ? And was there something that prompted you to kind of get into that?
Yeah, so it's funny you ask that because growing up, right, I grew up Catholic, right?
Okay.
But it was kind of more just as a formality. I was a kid. I didn't have a lot of interest in religion, in Christ, in having a relationship with Christ. It was just this is what we do,
Mhm.
and there wasn't a lot of interest in belief, genuine belief on my part.
Yeah.
Um, excuse me, and I even did a few years in Catholic school, right? So I was just kind of, like I said, it was a formality for me. And, never really was big into going to church, didn't read the Bible, didn't pray. But I was Catholic,
Mhm.
right? Just
Yep.
because that's, again, a formality of the whole religion scenario for me.
Sure.
Um, Deployed overseas in 2010, start, learning more about their culture, their religion, their belief systems, and you start to kind of question things a little bit because here you are now in a combat, high stress environment, and these people believe that it's their religious duty to kill you.
Mhm.
So I just had a lot of questions about it. Decided that it's not for me anymore. I don't really have much of an interest in pursuing this further. I haven't really been pursuing it as a true Christian, anyways. So I'm just going to completely disassociate myself from Christ, from religion. And so that's what I did.
Mhm.
Took a complete step back. I never judged anybody who was religious. I never, spoke ill of it. I never, had anything negative to say. It just wasn't for me. And I just removed myself from it. Um, and it's funny because just this past fall, it was, September, October timeframe. Uh, I was just bored and there was something that kind of just called me to want to read the Bible
Mhm.
and get back into it. And there was no qualifying event, there was no rock bottom, there was, calling from Christ. It was just maybe I can give this another shot because there was a time when I believed, and maybe I need to just dig a little bit deeper and do a little bit more homework. And so I asked my girlfriend's father, where to start. So he
Yeah.
said, read the New Testament. And so I started reading the New Testament, and I'm still reading it. And it's funny, and I said this to Nick last week when he was on our show. It's funny how many of those stories, when you get into reading them and really getting into the dialogue, that how many of those principles and things of that nature translate to the human condition in our nature. So
For sure.
uh, now I'm back into it. I got myself a little religious medal here, Saint Michael,
Come on.
protector of warriors, and yeah, I pray every day now and just ask every single day that I be put on the right path and given the skill sets to carry out whatever God's will is for me, and whatever
Mm.
that path looks like, I just want to follow it and just be the best guy I can be.
Come on. Dude, that's awesome, man. Yeah, I always love the prompting of the Holy Spirit that says, "Hey, get back into the Bible, man." And like, I haven't read the Bible for a really long time myself. I mean, I was kind of reading Proverbs and things like that, but just even 2 months ago, I was like, "All right, I'm going to get back into it and just start reading from Genesis 1." And I was like, "Man,
Mhm.
I'm going to get into this." And I'm only like, chapter 50 or something like that. But
Mhm.
man, it's so good to get back into that stuff. Man, so cool. I want to talk about your podcast though, because your
Yeah,
podcast, Be the Standard. This is an awesome show, by the way. People need to go
thank
out
you.
and start listening to it, man. And you mentioned before we started hitting record, you started this thing in February there. Why did you decide to start the podcast? Who's this for? And what's the biggest lesson that you've learned through the podcast journey so far?
Yeah, so that's kind of a loaded question, but I'll start with,
Yeah.
kind of how, the podcast came to be, right? So, probably last summer, maybe June, July, I decided that I wanted to write a book and really get my story out there. Started writing a book. I got, several pages into it and kind of just started to realize that, I don't have an audience to sell a book to.
Mm.
Um, it's just me, and I could publish a book, but what am I going to do? Publish it to the 200 people that know me, or the
Yeah.
400 followers on Instagram I have now, or currently at the time. And so, and I like to tell people this because it's funny, right? I decided, why not turn my story into a discussion? Why not turn, my failures, my downfalls, the things that I've struggled with, and also the positives, right? The come up from that and the rebounds from those negative things, and just turn it into a discussion, and take all those key principles that I've enacted in my life to kind of bounce back from tough situations. And again, I turned it into a podcast around just being the best person you can be. And what better way to encompass that by, be the standard in surrounding or encompassing that with, the four key principles of, setting standards, creating habits, executing, and then finally holding yourself accountable. So that's what I decided to do, and turned it into a podcast. And
Yeah.
the second part of your question, what am I learning in this experience is, I think the thing I'm learning the most now is that it is a process, right? To
Mhm.
get a podcast off the ground, it takes time, it takes commitment, it takes delayed gratification. It really takes all of those things that you need to enact in to basically get the outcomes you want in anything you attempt, right?
Yeah.
I'll compare it to going to the gym. You can't go to the gym for 2 days and get the body that you want. You got to
Sure.
do it for a long period of time. You have to really commit to it. You have to have discipline. You have to really create those habits around your goals. And so that's what I've had to do in this podcast, is really commit to it. And thankfully, I got a team of guys, myself, Mike, and my buddy Jeff that I grew up with, who's a producer, to really buy in on what it is that we're doing here. So I'm fortunate in that regard to have just a small team of guys that really support me and support us, and I'm grateful for that.
Come on, dude. Podcast is so good. It's, when you first started, there's like, you have no idea what you're doing, what you're going to do. Man, I started podcasting in 2017 and, didn't even have a camera. I was in a walk-in closet for, the first 100 episodes. I ran a 100-foot extension around the bed in my bedroom into the walk-in closet, like bad lighting, didn't even look into the camera, all that stuff, man. And you just learn as you go and you start to get better. And in fact, I was like 100 episodes in and someone's like, well, how can I listen to it on Apple? And I was like, what the hell is that, man? I didn't even know what Apple Podcast was. I was like recording the show and uploading it to YouTube and calling that my podcast. And so it's been an interesting journey, but now,
Yeah.
500 plus interviews in
Wow.
since 2017, man. And it's been
Wow.
fun to do. You just learn so much and you get, awesome partnerships and
Yeah.
collaborations. And some of my best friends today are people that have been on my show or I've been on their show and I've never met them in person, right? It's just like, we've just connected through podcasting. But I look at a podcasting even differently. Like, yeah, all that stuff's great, but it's almost legacy for me. I wish that I could go back 3, 4 generations deep and hear my great grandfather's story from him, right?
Yeah.
And I can't, but I can do that for future generations down my line, and they can go back. Man, great grandpa Erik was a badass, man. Like, that's
Mhm.
the kind of thing, that I want to leave a legacy there. And you talked about briefly there, like 4 principles: setting standards, unbreakable habits, execution, and accountability. Why are those 4 so important for you?
Because so basically what I did when I came up with those is I kind of just sat there and was like, you know what? I went through a tough time a few years ago, going through divorce, and things were just, it was almost like another rock bottom after my first rock bottom of coming home from Afghanistan, and struggling with PTSD and stuff like that.
Mm,
But I kind of just sat there and was like, I need to make a change. And, I knew that in order to do that, like, you can't just wake up one day and be different, right? You have to have some kind of a process in place, and you have to have somewhat of a format to follow as really go through that journey of making real changes in who you are, and how you want to present yourself to others. And so for me, it was, I needed to change my standards. I need to readjust, what was acceptable, what wasn't, what I was going to tolerate, and what I wasn't. So that was the start. And then after that, it was, how am I going to do that? What habits am I going to create and enact and put into practice every single day in order to, you know, meet those standards that I've set for myself. And
yeah.
then after that, okay, what happens when you start to enact these things? You got to execute. right? You got to execute on your habits. You got to execute on the promises and the contracts that you make with yourself. And then
Mhm.
lastly, accountability. If you don't have accountability in anything that you're trying to accomplish, in anything that you tell yourself you're going to do, you're not going to accomplish anything that you tell yourself that you're going to do, right?
Huge.
So accountability is the biggest piece because you need to be, in my opinion, kind of doing these recalibrations and reassessments on yourself as often as possible. I like to say daily, but let's be realistic. A few times a week, you should be checking in on yourself and your goals
Yep.
and making sure that you're on the path to getting to, whatever that end goal looks like for you, whatever your
Mhm.
standards that you've set for yourself look like, your habits. Um, and so that's how it just all became a process. It all became encompassed into that um idea of just what it means to be the standard. And I like to say that being the standard and be the standard, we don't just wear this shirt and we wake up and we're perfect every single day. It's a goal, it's something to strive for, it's something that we're chasing every single day. And it applies to everything. It applies to your work, it applies to your relationships, it applies to your social settings, really everything. So yeah, that's kind of how it all came about, and how I put those things into practice, and why I put those things into practice.
Yeah, man, such a good mindset to have as you step into. Everyone should be having those type of standards in front of them, man. Accountability, man. Execution, breakable habits, setting standards, man. So good. People need to do that. Uh, uh, I was looking at your website and you talk about, and we touched base on this earlier, but kind of childhood trauma, how it impacts
Mhm.
adulthood, and how your past is not an excuse to fail. And that
Yeah.
absolutely hit home for me, like I said. But
Mhm.
for men out there who struggle with their childhood trauma and living in this victim mentality, like, can you
Mhm.
deep dive into those areas? And what would you say is step one for them to kind of get through that?
Yeah, that's a great question, and that's something that Mike and I talk about, often is to make sure that we're rejecting that victim mentality,
Yeah.
because at the end of the day, and I really hate using that term, but it fits.
Hmm.
Um, you can't change what happened. It's done. You just can't. But what you can do, and what you're always in control of, is your next move. So that I this idea that this has happened to me, and now this is my identity, this is who I am, and now I'm just stuck here. I can't buy that,
Right.
because I know that it's not true. I know it to be a falsehood, right? You're in control of You can't control what happened, right? You, like, I'm a victim of the stuff that I dealt with as a kid. I had no control over it. I was a kid. I didn't choose any of it, but it happened,
Hmm.
right? I had options though. I could have let that define me. I could have let that, hold me back and kind of keep my family's, legacy, if you will, trending in that wrong direction. Or I could have taken those things like I did and kind of used them as fuel in a fire to kind of be better and
Hmm.
make sure that, I didn't make those same mistakes that were made previously. For example, like, my mother was a drug addict and contracted AIDS by, sleeping with multiple men, or,
Hmm.
and all of that. I could have done those things and had an excuse for doing those things. But to the contrary, I've never tried a drug. I've never tried a cigarette. I've always known that those things were just the exact opposite of what I wanted.
Hmm.
So, this idea that, you're powerless over your next move because of, perhaps something that's happened to you, it's just not something that I can be sold.
Hmm.
Um, and the way to combat that, I think, is, just to understand that key principle of just not being willing to accept that your past dictates your future. And that's
Yeah.
why I say all the time that, life doesn't provide you the luxury of blaming your past for future failures, because your boss can't afford to care that you went through trauma. um, your spouse, she might care, but it's not okay for you to dump all those things on them either, right?
Hmm.
So your friends, all of these people, like, some of these people might care, but at the end of the day, everybody else is dealing with their own shit too. It's just different.
Yep.
So you can't afford to be a victim and just be a failure because these things happen to you. There's so many people around you that are also struggling, and they're fighting.
Yep.
And so you need to kind of understand that, you're not alone. And that's why I tell my story. People need to understand that they're not alone. Like, we're all going through shit and we're all going through it together. It's just different,
Yep.
right? Everybody's traumas, everybody's story, everybody's, difficulties are just different, but they're there and they're present. So,
Mhm. Man, come on. So good, dude. Yeah, I think people they allow that their past to hold them back from stepping into their purpose, man. And
yeah,
I've always kind of had that thing of like our past and the people's opinions of us does not define our future, man. We can get
yeah.
into it and step into our purpose at any moment. Oh man, so good, dude. Now, when you were leading teams in military, what would you say was your or is your leadership style, and how does it apply to your life today? Like being the entrepreneur that
Mhm.
you are, like how are you utilizing those leadership skills that you learned in the military?
Yeah, so for me, I mean, the most basic principle of leadership has always been just being willing to be the guy that leads by example,
Mm,
right?
yeah.
Um, be the first guy in, be the last guy out. Um, it's just really those basic principles of just leading by example and um understanding. And I'll steal it from Jocko Willink, right? I've read his book 3 times. Listened to it once, read it twice, actually. Um, Extreme ownership,
Mm,
understanding that the performance of your team is a direct result of your leadership. So if your team fails, that's on you.
mhm.
If your team is successful, that's on them. So, you give them the praise when things go well, and you never take it. You always give it to your team for their ability to perform and make you look good. Let the higher ups, compliment you if they want to, but from a top down approach, always give the credit for the success of the team, and always take responsibility for the failures when the team doesn't perform the way they should.
Yeah, man. So good. So good, dude. I love this conversation, man. This has been so much fun, dude. I love to finish my show. I'm a music guy, so I'm going to finish the show with a fun question. They're like, what kind of
Yeah.
music do you listen to? Do you have a favorite band that you like to listen to?
Yeah, man. So it's funny because I do actually like I like being asked this question because I listen to everything.
Yeah.
Uh, you know, I, it's funny. I grew up in Worcester, Mass, which is a city very diverse, a couple 100,000 people. But when my aunt adopted me at 10, I moved to this small town, Thompson, Connecticut. And there's only, I think, 19,000 people or something like that. It's very small.
Wow.
Jeff, how many people? 10,000 people in this town. Small, because Jeff, my producer, we grew up together. He still lives there.
Nice.
So there's only 10,000 people in that town, and my graduating class was, I think, just over 80 something kids. And so it's funny because, right, I like, if I'm in the gym, it's rap, it's heavy metal, it's Disturbed, it's a Little Baby, it's
Yeah.
Biggie, Tupac, Metallica. I love.
Come on.
And then also, I'm a country guy too, so I love country. I appreciate you having me on. I've been following your content probably since I started my podcast. So
Sweet.
I've kind of had you on my radar as far as somebody I'd love to be a guest with and speak with. And yeah, I really do appreciate you having me on.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely.
Hey, if you've ever thought about starting a podcast but unsure where to go, you need to go check out erikallenmedia.com. Click on the resources tab there. I will walk you through how to start, launch, and run a podcast. I've recorded over 500 interviews since 2017, and I want to help you launch your podcast. Make sure that you hit that subscribe button so you catch every show when I drop them. Thanks again. Keep changing the world.